Chapter 11 of Workers Together. Workers Together, or An Endless Chain, by Pansy. Chapter 11. Cross Purposes. Now it happened that there was an occupant of the sunset room on that Thursday afternoon, for whose presence Joy had not planned. It came about on this wise. Dr. Everett spent many of his leisure moments at young Parks's bedside, and did for him all that care and skill could. Yet the young man rallied slowly. He had had a narrower escape than he knew, and shattered nerves, weakened by late hours, and careless habits in many directions, refused to respond rapidly to treatment. It must be confessed also, that Robert did what he could to retard matters by chafing over this enforced rest, and worrying much about doctor's bills and board bills, and the fear of losing his situation. This last the doctor set his heart at rest upon, by showing him a written promise from the senior partner of the firm to hold the situation open until the patient was pronounced well enough to return to work. "He happens to be a friend of mine," explained the doctor, and he readily agreed to the arrangement. So Robert added this to the long list of kindnesses received from Dr. Everett, and continued to puzzle his tired brains over the question, how should he ever repay? Meantime, the doctor was planning to get his patient downstairs. "If I should pick up my young man and land him in the easy chair in the sunset room some afternoon, what would you say?" This he asked Mrs. Saunders, and she had responded heartily, "I should say he was 3 times welcome, and I'd set about getting him a nice supper." Mrs. Saunders was apt to agree with whatever Dr. Everett proposed. Given such a cheery permission, the doctor had settled on this particular Thursday for carrying out his designs, and had Robert tucked comfortably among the cushions, when Joy came in to see that everything was ready for her guest. Had he known of the expected guest, this movement on the doctor's part would certainly not have been made. He saw nothing in Robert Parks calculated to be in any sense a help to Hester Mason, and certainly she was the last person who could help him. But Joy Saunders had perversely kept her own counsel as to the time for carrying out the doctor's suggestions. She did not "want him hovering around, listening to her trying to talk with Hester Mason," she told her mother. "Hester would be afraid of him; she was herself about half the time; and if she were to entertain the girl, she must do it in her own fashion. It would be time enough for the doctor to discover the success of his proposition when he came to his 6 o'clock dinner. He might come in after dinner and experiment if he would; but for the afternoon, while the stitch for the hood was being learned, she would have none of him." Therefore they worked at cross purposes, and she stopped midway in the room and gazed at Robert Parks in a surprise that was not unmingled with dismay. What was she to do with him while she taught the stitch for the new hood? "Well," he said, "I'm not an apparition, real flesh and blood. What have I done that you shouldn't have a word for me?" "How do you do?" she said, coming gravely towards him and extending her hand. "You have given me a surprise. I did not think you were well enough to be down. Does Dr. Everett know it?" "Dr. Everett knows most things, I fancy, and plans them. At least he seems to have the shaping of them to a surprising degree. I have a right to quarrel with you. Why have you deserted me during all these days? I was left to make Rehoboam's acquaintance in the best way I could. Have you been near me since that first morning?" "Oh, yes, quite near you. I sat outside the door for hours while you were sleeping, ready to answer the bell." "I wish I had known it. I would have awakened at once and rung it. Nobody ever seemed to answer it but that rosy-headed damsel who omits all her G's. I take it as very cruel in you to desert a fellow in his sore need. Why didn't you come to see me occasionally?" "Mother came in my place," said Joy quietly, and added, "I am glad to see you so much better, and able to be downstairs. If you will let me move your chair a little, I can screen your face from the glare of the fire." While she did this, and other little things to make him comfortable, he meantime watching her grave face with a satisfied air, She wondered what she could do with Hester Mason. It would not do to banish him. No other room was so well suited to an invalid. Neither did another room in the house promise the privacy that she desired in carrying out her experiment. Why could not Dr. Everett have given her a chance to plan better? Even while she wondered this, she smiled at her own folly. Why should he have considered it necessary to explain to her that his patient was coming downstairs today? Still, he might have thought that they possibly had uses for their sunset room. "It is our only speck of privacy," she told herself in an injured tone. "Or it used to be. It seems to have lost even that." She had little time for thought. The opening door revealed her mother and Hester Mason, brought directly to that room by her own express command. She went forward to meet and introduce her to Robert Parks. There was really no other way. Apparently Hester cared for no other way. The presence of a handsome young man in an interesting state of invalidism was by no means an unpleasant feature of the situation. She was not in the least embarrassed, but was bright and sunny, and if loud-voiced still, it sounded enough like a whiff of the outside world for young Parks to relish it well. Before they were seated, or had time for embarrassment, Joy was summoned to the hall. "It's that boy from Foster's," explained her mother in a disturbed tone. "He says he won't keep you a minute, and he must see you and nobody else. He is in the front hall. I suppose you will have to go." And Joy went. "I have seen you before," commenced Hester, directly the door closed after Joy. "I remember your face very well." "Possibly. That is encouraging. Where have I had the honor of being looked at by you?" "Oh, I didn't look at you much." She detected the sarcasm, but was still good-natured and unconcerned. "I remember I thought you looked cross, and I didn't wonder at it. Your counter was in such a tumble. I felt half sorry for you, and had a mind to offer to straighten it out. It was when you were rather new at that counter, and Mrs. Eastman had just been trading or pretending to. I know her. She comes into our store occasionally, and turns things upside down and inside out, and asks 150 questions, and doesn't buy a pennyworth." "Then you are in the mercantile business?" "Oh, yes, like yourself. I own the entire store, of course, and only spend a little time behind the counter for recreation. I suppose you look in at your store occasionally when you are well. You are the senior partner, I believe?" Robert Parks laughed a merrier laugh than he had indulged in since his accident. The quickness of the girl amused him. She kept a sober face, but her eyes sparkled roguishly. "You might as well be friendly," she said presently, in a cheery tone, "for you don't look able to walk out of this room, and I am going to stay here all the afternoon. I have come to learn how to make a hood and to stay to tea. That was what she said, and we can have a great deal pleasanter time if you are good-natured and friendly." "All right," said Robert, laughing again, and now disarmed. "We'll call it a bargain. What is the hood to be, and why are you making it?" "It is to be crimson, a real rich, downright crimson. Lovely color, look if it isn't. Do you know shades, or don't you have to deal with them? As to why I am making it, I hope it is for me to wear sleigh riding and skating and the like. That is one reason why, and another is, because she is a nice sweet thing and offered to show me how. Isn't she sweet?" "Who, Miss Joy? I hardly know her." Robert was growing stiff again. For some reason he did not like to have this girl speak of her with such easy familiarity. "You know you admire her very much. Why don't you be honest and say so? People who mean to be friendly must always begin by being honest. I like her, and I know her pretty well, though this afternoon is the second time in my life that I ever spoke to her." "Then why are you here?" Tone and manner expressed undisguised astonishment. Hester laughed gleefully. "I can't tell you. It is twice as much as I understand myself. I'll tell you what I suspect. It is my opinion that she is good, very good. Not one of the sham kind, you know. They are plenty. But I mean away to the core, and she really would like to have me good, and you too, I dare say. And therefore she helps to take care of you, and shows me how to make hoods. But I am afraid she will be disappointed in me. I don't know how it is with you, but there doesn't seem to be enough to me to be real honest good. I could do the make-believe, but some way, as I have to live, the real thing would come too hard." What an impudent girl she was, actually putting herself on the same social scale with him, and talking as though Miss Joy's friendship for him, and kindness to her, must be accounted for on the same ground. Yet he could not help liking her. She was so bright and gay and original. After all, why wasn't she his equal? He asked himself cynically. He might have a better knowledge of English grammar than she had, and thanks to his mother, he had a purer pronunciation and better manners. But those were trifles easily learned if one had the chance. On the whole, he resolved to have a good time with her during this one afternoon, whatever she was. He had been bored long enough, it was really time that he had a little fun. So he laid aside his half-patronizing manner, and meeting her on common ground, indulged in the gayest sort of chatter, until, when Joy returned, the boy from Foster's having kept her many minutes instead of one, they seemed as well acquainted as though they had known each other for months. The rest of the afternoon, viewed from Joy's standpoint, was a failure. The making of the sea foam progressed nicely, Hester proving herself as quick-witted and deft-fingered as Joy had imagined she might be. But the conversation was the lightest kind of froth. The more silent Joy grew, the more merry did the pair of tongues seem to wax. Whether Robert Parks resented Joy's evident disapprobation, or whether he was really fascinated by the gay girl's fun, did not appear on the surface. Certain it is that he met all her sallies half-way, and declared that he was growing better every hour. When Dr. Everett arrived, Joy hardly knew whether she was soothed or irritated by his evident dismay at the state of affairs. But when he chanced to stand near for a moment, near enough to her to say in low tones, "If I had been aware of your expecting company this afternoon, I should have advised my patient to remain in seclusion one day longer," she decided to be irritated. What right had Dr. Everett to presume that her mother's private sitting room would be at the service of patients of his whenever he chose to bring them? Why had he not taken the trouble to inquire whether she expected company, or at least whether his plans would be agreeable? The muffins were excellent, so was Joy's cake, and the oysters, Robert Parks declared, were actually nicer than those his mother cooked. Notwithstanding which, in the opinion of at least 2 persons, the supper was a failure. Dr. Everett, invited by Mrs. Saunders to take tea at the round table, exerted himself bravely to be genial and at the same time sensible. He found the task a hard one. Hester Mason, excited by her unusual surroundings, led on by the quick wits of Robert Parks, was in the highest state of jollity, seeming utterly incapable of appreciating a sensible thought. Mrs. Saunders, conscious that matters were going wrong, yet powerless to right them, vibrated uneasily from the select company in the bright room to the larger company in the usual dining room, and at intervals wished that the doctor hadn't so many new-fangled notions that made Joy's cheeks red in attempting to carry out. Directly the supper was concluded, the doctor somewhat peremptorily remanded his patient back to solitude, and went to see that he was made comfortable for the night. But they might as well have allowed him to stay. The opportunities of the afternoon were beyond redemption. If Hester Mason had at any time the slightest intention of being what she called good, the afternoon's frolic had apparently frittered all thoughts of it away. She was good-natured and grateful, assured Joy that she had had a splendid time, and that she thought her hood was just gay, and would never forget what a nice afternoon she had had, and she would make every girl in the crowd nearly die with envy by telling them all about it, and this was all. No chance for even a suggestive little parting sentence, for Hester's tongue ran wildly, even up to the very last moment, when she walked away, attended by grave gray-haired Thomas, who was father to Mrs. Saunders's boy Jim, and half a dozen others besides. Exceedingly amused was Hester at the idea of being guarded to the very door of the street car; but she seized the old man's arm and moved off in utmost good humor, glancing back to give a familiar parting nod to Joy, who stood in the doorway apparently looking after her, but really looking at space. Presently Joy turned and went back into the bright little room, where her mother was already at work removing traces of the unusual guests, glancing furtively now and again at her daughter's troubled face, and wondering whether silence were better than speech. The doctor tapped softly, and, hardly waiting for an invitation, entered, and went over to his favorite position, a corner between the open grate and the sofa, where he could lean his elbow on the mantel and look down at Joy. Chapter 12.